Have you ever walked into a room and instantly felt eyes on you? Not admiration, not desire, judgment. Like your very presence rewrote the script, bent gravity, cracked the air. That was Aphrodite, the goddess nobody asked for but everyone was obsessed with. She didn't crawl from the depths of love or grow in the warmth of affection. No, she erupted from violence, from mutilation, from sea foam and severed lineage. A divine glitch, a beautiful mistake, the kind of origin story that makes even the gods uncomfortable. And from the second she emerged, the world changed. Because Aphrodite wasn't just another Olympian. She was desire incarnate, a force so primal, so disorienting, that gods waged wars and mortals lost kingdoms just trying to be near her. But let's not get distracted by her face, or her hips, or the half-naked statues crafted by men who thought marble could explain mystery. Aphrodite wasn't about sex. She was about power, the kind of power that doesn't need thunderbolts or tridents, the kind that whispers in ears, lingers in glances, and shatters dynasties with a sigh. But before the seductions, the jealousies, the scandals that made Olympus spin, there was a wave, a knife, a god who bled stars, and a goddess who rose. Let's begin with Uranus, not the distant planet, but the primordial sky. He ruled above Gaia, the earth, with domination disguised as partnership. Together they birthed children, the Titans, the Cyclopes, the hundred-handed ones. But Uranus feared his own creations. So like a divine hoarder with commitment issues, he shoved them back into Gaia. And Gaia, suffocating on the inside, literally did what mothers in mythology always do. She plotted. She handed a sickle to her son Cronus and whispered, "Cut the sky." So Cronus did. He ambushed Uranus, carved his father open, and cast his genitals into the sea. Now if you think that's the peak of mythological weirdness, just wait. Because from that bloodied foam where sky and sea collided, where violence met salt, something began to form. Not a monster, not a storm. A woman, naked, perfect, radiant, terrifying. Aphrodite, no parents, no childhood, no guidance, just emergence, fully formed, and already too much. Even the gods didn't know what to do with her. She wasn't born into a system. She broke it. She walked into Olympus like a siren into a monastery. Every gaze turned, every vow trembled. Poseidon paused, Apollo stared, Hermes smiled too long. Even Zeus, who never needed an excuse to make bad decisions, hesitated. Because Aphrodite didn't ask for attention. She reversed gravity and made you give it. And Hera, oh Hera felt it instantly. This wasn't just another pretty face, this was a threat. Because Aphrodite didn't play by Olympus's rules. She was the rule no one admitted to following. Let's pause here, because this is where most stories get it wrong. They paint Aphrodite as shallow, vain, the ditzy love goddess with nothing but lips and laughter. A cartoon, a sex symbol, a side character. But no one makes that many gods panic without substance. Aphrodite wasn't vapid, she was strategic. Emotional chaos, yes, but chaos with a purpose. See, she understood something none of the other Olympians could quite grasp. Love isn't gentle, desire isn't safe, beauty isn't passive. They're all weapons, and she wielded them better than any sword. From the moment she entered Olympus, she forced the gods to reveal themselves, not through battle, but through want, through longing, through the vulnerability of need. That's real power. Because when someone wants you, really wants you, they're exposed, open, breakable. And Aphrodite, she watched the cracks form in their armor, but she wasn't cruel, not yet. She was curious, detached, like a being who knew she was a symbol before she was a person, before she was even a name. And the first thing Olympus tried to do was control her. They married her off to Hephaestus, the blacksmith god, the outcast, brilliant, kind, but unwanted by nearly everyone. Zeus thought this would tame her, anchor her, ground the divine wildfire in a routine. But Aphrodite isn't made for chains, especially not polite ones. And from this mismatched union, this mythological attempt at damage control, the chaos really began. Because if you trap a force of nature in a cage made of expectation, she doesn't vanish, she expands. And everyone starts to feel the heat. Married to Hephaestus, the safest choice, the dullest choice. A god of craft, yes, but also of stability, of things that don't break unless you strike them. Zeus thought Aphrodite needed containment, something solid, like a husband who worked with fire yet never burned. But Aphrodite wasn't looking for fire that warmed. She was born from destruction, from foam and fury, from a wound so cosmic it birthed the goddess. And so, she wandered, into rooms, into hearts, into every space that said off limits. Ares was first, war god, reckless, beautiful in the way fire is beautiful, until it reaches your skin. Their affair wasn't secret for long, but secrecy was never the point. They weren't hiding, they were daring Olympus to react, because this wasn't just lust, it was rebellion. Aphrodite wasn't seducing Ares, she was claiming power in a pantheon, where her body was supposed to be decoration. And suddenly, the gods were uncomfortable, not because of the betrayal. Olympus ran on betrayal, but because Aphrodite was choosing, not being chosen. She wasn't a prize, she was a player, and that terrified them. Because a woman who controls her own desire is harder to manipulate, harder to shame, harder to reduce, so they tried. They told tales, whispered slanders, called her promiscuous, fickle, dramatic, painted her not as a strategist, but a symptom, a beautiful disease spreading through Olympus. But she didn't flinch, she smiled, because Aphrodite knew the truth. Shame is a leash, and she'd already chewed through hers. Still, the myths persisted. The infamous golden apple, the beauty contest, the seed of 1,000 ships, and the spark of a war that would scar generations. The judgment of Paris. It's often told like a vanity contest between goddesses. But beneath the glitter and gowns was something far more sinister, male projection. Eris, goddess of discord, tossed a golden apple marked to the fairest. Hera, Athena, Aphrodite, each believed it belonged to her. And why wouldn't they? They weren't just women, they were archetypes. Hera, power; Athena, wisdom; Aphrodite, beauty; and the judge, immortal, Paris of Troy. He wasn't wise, he wasn't neutral, he was human, flawed, malleable, and very much aware that pleasing a goddess might come with perks. Each offered him something. Hera promised kingdoms, Athena offered victory in battle, and Aphrodite, she promised love, not the idea of love, not the statue, the experience. Helen, the most beautiful mortal woman alive, already married of course, but when has that ever stopped the gods? Paris chose Aphrodite, and with that choice he doomed a city, launched a war, lit the sky with fire and drowned the earth in blood. But here's the twist, Aphrodite didn't cause the war, choice did. The choice to see beauty as possession, love as a trophy, desire as something owed. Paris didn't choose Aphrodite because he understood love. He chose her because he wanted what she represented, power disguised as passion, and she gave it to him, not out of kindness, not out of cruelty, but because mortals have always confused longing with destiny. And Aphrodite, she gives you what you want so you can see what it costs. That's her curse, and her wisdom. But the story doesn't end with the burning of Troy or the fall of heroes, because Aphrodite's power wasn't confined to battlefields or bedroom whispers. She had children, and like every god in Olympus, her offspring weren't reflections, they were contradictions. Eros, not Cupid, not the winged toddler with heart-shaped arrows, the original Eros. Desire in its rawest form, uncontrollable, amoral. The pull between atoms, the madness before love has a name. Aphrodite didn't just birth desire, she weaponized it. And Eros, he carried that legacy, shooting gods and mortals alike with arrows that didn't ask permission, just consequence. Then there was Harmonia, born of Aphrodite and Ares. Yes, war and love made peace, at least for a moment. But even she wasn't spared from Olympus's curse. Her wedding was ruined by that same golden apple, that same divine pettiness. And her necklace, a gift from Hephaestus, was cursed, because irony in Olympus is practically ritual. Every child of Aphrodite bore a different shade of her chaos. Some brought joy, others tragedy, but all of them proved one thing. You can't touch love without bleeding, and yet we do. Again and again, we chase it, crave it, crown it, even when it devours us. Because Aphrodite isn't just a goddess, she's a mirror, and what you see in her depends entirely on what you refuse to face in yourself. Most gods rule by fear, thunderbolts, tridents, shadows that stretch across kingdoms. Aphrodite, she ruled with something far more dangerous, invitation. She didn't command, she compelled. Her power wasn't in what she said, it was in what others felt around her. In the way voices softened, knees buckled, vows blurred, and that made her the most unpredictable force on Olympus. Because fear can be fought. Desire, it leaks through armor. But here's the great misunderstanding. Aphrodite wasn't manipulative by nature. She didn't invent lust or longing. She revealed it, held up a divine spotlight and said, "Look what you already want." And what people wanted was terrifying. Control, escape, connection, domination, redemption. Love is never simple, and she never pretended it was. Because for Aphrodite, love wasn't flowers and lullabies. It was the scream behind the smile, the storm under the kiss. It was blood, and ache, and heat, and hope, tangled together into something no god or mortal could fully define. And yet, they kept trying. Artists painted her, poets praised her, priests built temples in her name, not to worship her, but to contain her, to sculpt her into something less dangerous, a fertility goddess, a symbol of harmony, a marble muse, reduced to curves and candles. But none of that could hold her, because Aphrodite doesn't live in shrines. She lives in impulse, in that split-second glance across a crowded room, in the trembling before a forbidden touch, in the silence after someone says, "I love you," and doesn't hear it back. She's there, always, and Olympus hated her for it, because Aphrodite couldn't be controlled with rules, temples, or marriages. She was an open wound on the gods' illusion of control. They could plan wars, forge alliances, rewrite fates, but desire, it slipped through the cracks. It whispered in ears when no one was looking. It broke the strongest oaths with nothing more than a heartbeat. And so they blamed her. Every affair, her influence. Every betrayal, her doing. Every time a man or god abandoned logic for longing, they didn't question themselves. They pointed to her, as if she had forced their lips to move, their eyes to linger, their hearts to betray. Aphrodite became the cosmic scapegoat for every inconvenient emotion. But she didn't apologize, because she understood something the others didn't. There is no power greater than vulnerability. And love, real love, requires exposure, risk, the kind of emotional nakedness even Zeus flinched from. That's why they feared her, not because she was seductive, but because she reminded them that even gods could be undone by a kiss, even immortals could ache. Still, they tried to trap her in predictability. Love goddess, queen of hearts, bringer of fertility. But love, in its purest form, doesn't breed peace. It shatters comfort, breaks expectations, rewrites lives. Ask Adonis, he was beautiful, mortal, doomed. Aphrodite loved him, truly, deeply. The kind of love that makes even a goddess believe she can have something ordinary, safe, human. But love, once again, became a battlefield. Ares, jealous. Persephone, resentful. Fate, cruel. Adonis died in Aphrodite's arms, bleeding from a boar's tusk. Some say sent by Ares, others say by Artemis. It doesn't matter. He died, and she wept. Real tears, the kind of grief only gods understand, because they live long enough to lose everything. From his blood, a flower bloomed, the anemone. Fragile, brief, a symbol of beauty born from pain. That's Aphrodite in one image. Not perfection, paradox. A divine being who embodied pleasure, but was built from trauma. A goddess worshipped for joy, yet followed by sorrow. And perhaps that's why mortals loved her more than any other. Not because she was flawless, but because she was honest about what it means to want, to break, to hope again anyway. And yet, for all her depth, her myth kept being flattened, turned into costume, seduction, a perfume brand. Because it's easier to laugh at beauty than to reckon with it. Easier to say she's just a distraction than to admit she's the truth we try to escape. But here's what makes Aphrodite divine. She never let herself be small. Not in love, not in grief, not even in betrayal. She stood in the chaos she created, owned it, and still said, "This is what it means to feel," even when it hurt, especially then. If Aphrodite had followed Olympus's script, she would have stayed quiet, graced altars, blessed marriages, smiled on cue. She would have let the myths reduce her to a background decoration, just another divine wife or heavenly mistress, humming love songs while the real gods played at war. But Aphrodite never played quiet. She played dangerous, because while the other gods measured strength in battles and blood, she measured it in surrender, not submission, but intimacy. That terrifying moment when someone lets go of their armor and says, "Here, this is me," and that breaks more men than war ever did. So Aphrodite kept breaking things, not out of cruelty, but because love, desire, even beauty, they disrupt, they unravel what's predictable, they threaten the systems that demand distance and control, which is why Olympus tried so hard to silence her, not with exile, with mockery. They laughed at her, turned her power into punchlines, reduced her to vanity, to scandal, to soft-focus mythology. But mocking something is just fear in disguise. And Aphrodite knew if they couldn't beat her, they'd belittle her. So she did the one thing that always makes tyrants squirm. She kept existing, fully, loudly, unapologetically. She walked through Olympus like a living contradiction, a goddess forged from violence, embodying desire, demanding respect, a woman who didn't need your approval to be unforgettable. And perhaps that's why her story, unlike so many others, survived. Because Aphrodite didn't fade into moral lessons or golden statues. She slipped into culture, into language, into us. Try and erase her, and she reappears in every first kiss, in every reckless crush, in every moment someone says I want you, and really means it. She is the whisper before the fall, the look that lingers too long, the instinct that overrides logic. She's still here, and not just as the goddess of love, that's far too small. She's the goddess of complicated truths, of the parts of ourselves we try to hide, our hunger, our insecurity, our need to be seen, and that's what makes her different from the other Olympians. They ruled over elements, domains, archetypes. Aphrodite ruled over us, our hearts, our chaos, our humanity. She didn't need followers kneeling in prayer. She just needed us to feel something. Because the moment we did, we were hers. But make no mistake, Aphrodite's legacy isn't romance, it's revolution. She taught us that love isn't weakness, that beauty isn't permission, that vulnerability isn't failure. It's the beginning of power. She flipped the divine hierarchy on its head. And it wasn't through seduction. That's the myth they tell to feel safe. It was through intimacy, a force so potent it made even the gods uncomfortable. Because intimacy strips away performance. And without performance, most of Olympus had nothing left. But Aphrodite, she never performed. She presented, and the world reacted, sometimes with worship, sometimes with hate, often with both. Because the truth is, we love to love her, until she holds up the mirror. Then we flinch, because she doesn't show us perfection. She shows us truth, unvarnished, unfiltered, undeniable. And that's her most dangerous quality. Not her beauty, not her lovers, not even her divine lineage, but her clarity. She sees what people want before they do, and she makes them see it too, which is why no temple could contain her. No myth could tame her, no god could rule her, because Aphrodite wasn't just born from chaos, she is chaos with a heartbeat. And every time someone says I don't believe in love, or it's just physical, or I'm better off alone, she smiles. Not mockingly, but knowingly, because she knows you'll come back. If the gods feared Aphrodite, mortals were haunted by her. Not because she descended with fire and fury. She didn't need spectacle, she only needed proximity. A glance, a thought, a whisper you couldn't shake. Because when Aphrodite touched your life, she didn't leave fingerprints, she left hauntings. Suddenly, the song you always skipped made you cry. Suddenly, a stranger's smile felt like destiny. Suddenly, you couldn't breathe unless someone else was in the room. Love, obsession, devotion, jealousy, all wrapped together in a perfume no one could explain, but everyone remembered. She didn't bring peace, she brought awareness. And for mortals, that was both a blessing and a curse, because Aphrodite didn't teach them how to love. She made them realize how much they already wanted to. And nothing terrifies a soul like discovering its own depth. In her wake, kingdoms crumbled, marriages twisted. Great men fell to their knees over letters never sent, and eyes never met again. But the pain, that was part of it. Aphrodite never promised comfort. She promised connection, even if it hurt, especially if it hurt. Because she knew something the other gods refused to admit. We are defined by what we reach for, not what we have, not what we conquer, not what we control, what we ache for. And mortals ache endlessly. She watched them fall in love with the wrong people, stay too long in cold arms, whisper prayers to her in the dark, not for answers, but for relief. But she didn't stop them. Aphrodite never stops anyone. She only opens the door. You walk through it, you fall, you burn, and then you emerge, ruined, maybe, but also more alive. That's the part most myths skip. They show the destruction, the scandal, the heartbreak, but not what comes next, the clarity, the transformation, because no one walks away from Aphrodite unchanged. She is the moment before you leap, and the silence after you land. She doesn't fix you. She shows you who you are without your walls, and for some that's unbearable. For others, it's freedom. But let's be clear, Aphrodite wasn't always gentle. She had fury, she had pride, she had limits. If scorned, she didn't throw tantrums. She unmade you. Ask Hippolytus, a man who dared to reject her, who worshipped chastity and praised Artemis while mocking love as weakness. He thought himself above desire, clean, pure, untouchable. Aphrodite didn't scream, she didn't curse. She simply arranged the fall, a chain of choices, a thread pulled here, a lie whispered there, and soon Hippolytus was dead, trampled by his own horses, not because he lusted, but because he denied what makes us human. Aphrodite's revenge wasn't about romance, it was about balance, about reminding the world, you don't get to erase love and call it strength, because strength isn't denial, it's surrender with your eyes open. She wasn't cruel for punishment's sake, she was protective of what she represented, not just passion, but emotion, raw, unfiltered, inconvenient emotion, and anyone who tried to cage that, she broke them, not because she hated them, but because she pitied them. Because what is life without feeling? What is power without tenderness? What is divinity without desire? The other gods ruled with fear. Aphrodite ruled with memory. You didn't forget her. You couldn't. Even when you tried, she lingered. In letters never sent, in songs you played on repeat, in the ache behind your ribs when someone left without saying goodbye. She became part of humanity's architecture, not because she demanded worship, but because she reflected longing. And nothing is more eternal than that. The most dangerous gods aren't the ones who throw lightning, they're the ones who don't need to. Aphrodite never ruled Olympus by force. She didn't need temples, soldiers, or threats. She had something far more corrosive to divine order: choice. She didn't seduce mortals, she let them seduce themselves. She didn't start wars, she let kings ruin everything for a glance. She didn't demand anything, yet everything bent around her presence. That's not love, that's gravitational pull. And for a pantheon obsessed with hierarchy, that was a problem. Because how do you control someone who doesn't ask permission to exist? The answer is you don't. You brand her. You reduce her to vanity, to scandal, to perfume ads, and tragic romances. You turn her into a symbol so you don't have to face the reality. That love, when unfiltered, is a kind of weapon. Aphrodite didn't teach people to feel. She forced them to admit they already did, and that made her unstoppable. Not immortal because of her myth, but because she never relied on Olympus to stay relevant. She lives where rules fail, where people still chase things they can't explain, where logic loses to instinct, where one look ruins 10 years of discipline. She never had to be the strongest. She only had to be true. And truth? That's the one thing even the gods can't kill. So, let's recap. Aphrodite wasn't built to fit inside Olympus. She was born from an act of violence, forged without a father or script, and stepped into the world with no agenda, only gravity. They called her love. They blamed her for chaos. But what she really embodied was exposure, of ego, of fear, of desire. She didn't manipulate. She revealed. And for that, they tried to silence her. They failed. Because once someone learns to want, you can't unteach it. If this episode made you question how power really works, or reminded you that soft things can break harder things, subscribe. And if you've ever suspected that the gods of your life are just managing perception, hit that bell, because next time, we're going headfirst into the battlefield, with Ares the war god with daddy issues. It's not just about blood, it's about being seen, and what happens when rage is the only language a god remembers. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and remember, sometimes the most subversive thing you can do is feel something. See you in the next episode.